Some disappearances happen slowly, through careful institutional design. They begin with whispered concerns in palace corridors, escalate to formal surveillance, and end with a name quietly removed from all official records, as if that person never existed. What crime justifies erasing a human being from their own family's history? Prince Karl Alexander of Württemberg lost everything that should have been his birthright. His future as a German duke, his place in the succession, his family's protection, his very identity within the royal bloodline, all systematically stripped away because court officials discovered he loved men. This was not a gradual falling from grace. This was deliberate institutional destruction, executed through surveillance files, diplomatic correspondence, and carefully coordinated erasure campaigns designed to make him disappear from dynastic history entirely. The Württemberg court records, preserved in the Bavarian state archives, document a methodical campaign of sexual surveillance that began in 1891, when Karl Alexander was barely 21. Palace intelligence files reveal that court officials had been monitoring his private correspondence, tracking his social associations, and building comprehensive dossiers on his romantic attachments to young men within Stuttgart's artistic and military circles. These were not casual observations. These were systematic investigations designed to gather evidence for his complete removal from royal succession. Court memoranda from the Württemberg Royal Archives show that by 1893, palace administrators had compiled detailed intelligence reports on Karl Alexander's relationships with at least 3 documented male lovers: a cavalry officer named Victor von Seckendorf, a musician from the Stuttgart Opera, and a young nobleman whose family immediately severed all court connections once the surveillance became apparent. The files describe elaborate monitoring systems, intercepted letters, planted informants, coordinated social isolation designed to trap Karl Alexander into increasingly desperate and documented indiscretions. Most of these sealed royal files only surface because enough people stay inside this archive. Please subscribe to the channel, because once these doors close, they do not reopen. But the most devastating evidence comes from a preserved letter dated October 1894, written by Karl Alexander's own father, Duke Wilhelm II, to Kaiser Wilhelm II. The letter, discovered in the Prussian diplomatic archives, explicitly requests imperial support for his son's permanent exile, describing Karl Alexander's moral corruption as a threat to Württemberg's political alliance with Prussia. The father had chosen dynastic survival over his son's life. The institutional machinery that destroyed Karl Alexander was not spontaneous persecution. Court intelligence files reveal that Württemberg officials had been studying similar cases across German courts, particularly the forced exile of Prince Friedrich of Baden in 1889, and the systematic surveillance networks that Prussia had developed for monitoring royal sexual autonomy. They were implementing a tested template for managing inconvenient heirs. By 1895, Karl Alexander had been stripped of all military commissions, removed from succession documents, and given an ultimatum: accept permanent exile with a modest pension, or face public exposure and criminal prosecution under Prussia's expanding sodomy laws. The court records document his complete capitulation. He chose disappearance over destruction, but the result was the same: institutional erasure. But the files that survived reveal something far more sinister than personal scandal. They reveal systematic coordination between German courts to manage royal bloodlines through sexual surveillance and strategic elimination of unsuitable heirs. Karl Alexander was not the first. He would not be the last. Prince Karl Alexander was never meant to be disposable. Born in 1870 as the second son of Duke Wilhelm II of Württemberg, he represented critical dynastic insurance for one of Germany's most strategically positioned royal houses. Württemberg controlled key military alliances, railway networks, and industrial partnerships that the German Empire desperately needed to maintain. Karl Alexander's bloodline was not just noble heritage, it was state infrastructure. When his older brother, Prince Ulrich, died in a hunting accident in 1889, Karl Alexander suddenly became the direct heir to a throne that controlled southern German military logistics and billions in industrial wealth. Court documents from the Württemberg state archives reveal the immediate transformation of Karl Alexander's status following his brother's death. Palace administrators began implementing intensive royal protocol training, diplomatic education programs, and mandatory military service designed to prepare him for eventual succession. But these same files document a parallel development: the establishment of comprehensive personal surveillance systems to monitor his private conduct, social associations, and romantic inclinations. The future Duke of Württemberg could not be permitted the luxury of private life. The surveillance apparatus was not paranoia. It was practical statecraft. Württemberg maintained delicate political relationships with both Prussia and Austria-Hungary, requiring rulers who could navigate complex diplomatic marriages, military alliances, and economic partnerships. Court memoranda from 1890-1891 show palace officials calculating precise matrimonial strategies designed to strengthen Württemberg's position within the German Confederation. Karl Alexander was expected to marry strategically, produce male heirs, and maintain the social respectability necessary for international royal recognition. Intelligence files from the Bavarian diplomatic archives reveal that other German courts were already implementing sexual surveillance protocols for managing royal heirs whose personal inclinations threatened dynastic stability. The cases of Prince Ludwig of Bavaria's forced medical treatment in 1886 and Prince Friedrich of Baden's exile in 1889 had established precedents for institutional intervention when royal sexuality conflicted with state requirements. Württemberg officials were not pioneering new techniques. They were implementing proven templates. But Karl Alexander's case represented a particularly dangerous threat to imperial German stability. Unlike minor nobles whose sexual scandals could be contained through social isolation or financial settlements, the heir to Württemberg controlled military access routes that Prussia needed for potential conflicts with France. Court correspondence between Stuttgart and Berlin shows that Kaiser Wilhelm II's government was directly monitoring Karl Alexander's personal conduct through shared intelligence networks that coordinated information between royal houses. The preserved records document systematic institutional paranoia about royal sexual autonomy. Palace administrators maintained detailed files on appropriate marriage candidates, tracked the personal conduct of potential brides' families, and coordinated with other German courts to ensure that matrimonial alliances would strengthen rather than compromise imperial military strategy. Karl Alexander's romantic freedom was incompatible with these calculations. By 1892, court files reveal that Karl Alexander's personal surveillance had expanded beyond monitoring correspondence and social associations. Palace officials were documenting his emotional responses to proposed marriages, tracking his attendance at court social functions, and building psychological profiles designed to predict and control his romantic decision-making. The future of Württemberg was too valuable to risk on individual autonomy. The institutional machinery was already in motion. Karl Alexander did not yet understand that his personal life had become a matter of state security. The surveillance system that monitored Karl Alexander was not improvised persecution. It was institutionalized espionage operating within the palace walls themselves. Württemberg court records from 1891-1893, preserved in the Stuttgart State Archives, document the establishment of a comprehensive intelligence network designed specifically to monitor royal family members whose personal conduct threatened dynastic stability. Palace staff members were recruited as informants, correspondence was systematically intercepted, and social gatherings were infiltrated by trained observers who reported directly to court security officials. The operational files reveal sophisticated surveillance techniques that rivaled contemporary military intelligence operations. Court administrators established coded communication systems for reporting sensitive information, maintained detailed behavioral observation schedules, and created comprehensive dossiers that tracked not only Karl Alexander's activities, but also the identities backgrounds, and political affiliations of every person he encountered. The preserved intelligence reports show that palace officials were documenting the exact time, location, and duration of Karl Alexander's private meetings, recording the emotional content of his conversations, and building predictive profiles designed to anticipate and prevent romantic attachments. Administrative records from the Württemberg royal household reveal the financial infrastructure supporting this surveillance operation. Palace budgets from 1892-1894 show significant expenditures for security consultations, household staff supplements, and administrative coordination. Bureaucratic language that concealed payments to informants, surveillance equipment, and intelligence coordination with other German courts. The surveillance of Karl Alexander was not a byproduct of palace security. It was a dedicated institutional priority, requiring specialized personnel and substantial financial resources. Court correspondence between Stuttgart and Berlin, discovered in the Prussian diplomatic archives, documents the sharing of surveillance intelligence between royal houses. Palace officials were not operating in isolation. They were participants in a coordinated information network that allowed German courts to monitor and control royal sexual conduct across multiple dynasties. Intelligence files show that Württemberg officials received detailed reports on surveillance techniques used against Prince Adolf of Schaumburg-Lippe and Prince Georg of Saxe-Meiningen, allowing them to implement proven methods for managing problematic heirs. But the most disturbing evidence comes from intercepted personal correspondence that palace officials preserved as evidence of Karl Alexander's moral corruption. These letters, maintained in sealed court files, document intimate communications between Karl Alexander and his documented male companions. Palace intelligence officers were not merely monitoring these relationships. They were deliberately allowing them to develop in order to gather incriminating evidence for eventual prosecution. The surveillance was not designed to prevent scandal. It was designed to document and weaponize it. The preserved intelligence reports reveal systematic coordination between palace security, local law enforcement, and military intelligence designed to create comprehensive control over Karl Alexander's personal autonomy. Court officials maintained detailed maps of Stuttgart's social spaces, identified and monitored establishments where Karl Alexander might encounter potential romantic partners, and established informant networks within the city's artistic and military communities. Every aspect of his private life was subject to institutional observation and documentation. By 1893, palace files show that court officials possessed documented evidence of Karl Alexander's romantic relationships with multiple men, detailed behavioral profiles predicting his future conduct, and comprehensive legal strategies for using this information to force his compliance with dynastic requirements. The surveillance network had succeeded in creating the evidence necessary for his destruction. The question was no longer whether Karl Alexander would be exposed. It was when the palace would choose to deploy the evidence they had systematically gathered against him. The letters that destroyed Karl Alexander were never meant to survive. But palace archival protocols, designed to preserve diplomatic correspondence for future royal reference, accidentally preserved the very documents that court officials would later desperately attempt to eliminate. The Württemberg State Archives contain a collection of intercepted personal correspondence between Karl Alexander and his documented male companions, maintained in sealed files that were classified as dynastic security materials and forgotten in palace storage until their rediscovery in 1982. The most damaging evidence comes from a series of letters exchanged between Karl Alexander and Victor von Seckendorf, a cavalry officer stationed in Stuttgart's Imperial Regiment. These letters, written between March and August 1893, document an intimate romantic relationship that court officials characterized as a direct threat to Württemberg's political stability. The preserved correspondence reveals not only the emotional intimacy of their relationship, but also Karl Alexander's explicit rejection of proposed marriages and his stated intention to live according to my own nature, regardless of dynastic expectations. Court memoranda from the same period show that palace officials were intercepting and copying these letters before allowing them to reach their intended recipients. Intelligence files reveal a systematic letter-reading operation that monitored all correspondence entering and leaving Karl Alexander's private apartments. Palace staff members were specifically instructed to identify and document any communications that suggested romantic or sexual relationships with inappropriate partners. The surveillance was not random monitoring. It was targeted intelligence gathering designed to build a legal case for Karl Alexander's removal from succession. But these intercepted letters revealed something that court officials had not anticipated: Karl Alexander's explicit awareness of the surveillance and his deliberate decision to continue his relationships despite institutional threats. A letter dated June 1893, addressed to von Seckendorf, contains Karl Alexander's direct acknowledgement that palace spies monitor every word we exchange, and his stated refusal to sacrifice love for a throne that demands the surrender of my soul. These were not the words of a prince who could be easily controlled or redirected. Many of these lives were erased quietly, without witnesses. Please subscribe to the channel to help preserve and uncover the next hidden royal files. The preserved diplomatic correspondence between Württemberg and Prussian courts reveals the broader implications of Karl Alexander's defiant correspondence. Palace officials forwarded copies of the intercepted letters to Kaiser Wilhelm II's government, explicitly requesting imperial support for managing what they described as an inheritance crisis that threatens German strategic interests. The letters were not merely personal scandal. They were being weaponized as evidence of Karl Alexander's unsuitability for dynastic responsibility. Intelligence files document the systematic expansion of letter surveillance to include all of Karl Alexander's documented relationships. Court officials were intercepting correspondence with musicians, artists, and military officers who formed part of Stuttgart's underground social network where men could meet without official scrutiny. The preserved letters reveal that Karl Alexander was actively facilitating romantic connections between other men, creating what court officials characterized as a network of moral corruption that threatened to expose similar relationships among other German nobles. The most devastating letter, preserved in the Prussian diplomatic archives, was written by Karl Alexander to his documented lover, Heinrich von Castell, explicitly rejecting a proposed marriage to Princess Marie of Bavaria. In this letter, Karl Alexander states that he would choose exile over the hypocrisy of dynastic marriage, and declares his intention to live honestly, regardless of the consequences. Court officials recognized this as an impossible ultimatum. Palace administrators had gathered the evidence they needed. The intercepted letters documented not only Karl Alexander's romantic relationships, but also his explicit refusal to submit to dynastic control. The institutional machinery for his destruction was ready to deploy, and the letters would serve as both justification and weapon for his complete removal from royal succession. The destruction of Karl Alexander's autonomy accelerated dramatically following the palace's collection of incriminating correspondence. Court files from late 1893 document a coordinated pressure campaign designed to force compliance with dynastic marriage requirements through psychological manipulation, social isolation, and financial threats. This was institutional siege warfare designed to break his resistance through elimination of personal freedom. Administrative records from the Württemberg royal household reveal the practical mechanisms. Palace officials restricted Karl Alexander's access to personal funds, requiring court approval for all expenditures. His military commissions were placed under review, pending investigation of his conduct and associations. Court social functions excluded his documented companions while flooding his schedule with marriage candidates. Every element of daily life was redesigned to eliminate personal choice and enforce dynastic compliance. Preserved correspondence between Stuttgart court officials and German royal houses documents coordination of this isolation campaign. Letters from Bavarian court archives show palace administrators were notifying other royal families about Karl Alexander's unsuitability for marriage alliances, eliminating potential partnerships that might provide alternative support. Court officials were destroying his future options for independence. Intelligence files reveal sophisticated psychological pressure techniques designed to exploit Karl Alexander's documented emotional attachments. Palace officials targeted his lovers for harassment, investigation, and forced relocation. Victor von Seckendorf was transferred to a remote military posting without explanation. Heinrich von Castell's family was threatened with financial ruin unless they severed contact with Karl Alexander. Court administrators were destroying his support network to increase psychological dependence on palace approval. The most insidious element involved manipulating Karl Alexander's relationship with his own father. Court memoranda document efforts to convince Duke Wilhelm II that his son's moral corruption threatened Württemberg's political survival. Palace officials provided the Duke with selected excerpts from Karl Alexander's intercepted correspondence, presented without context, to maximize their apparent threat to dynastic stability. They were weaponizing family relationships to isolate Karl Alexander from remaining protection. Financial records from the Württemberg treasury reveal economic mechanisms used to enforce compliance. Karl Alexander's personal allowance was reduced, palace resource access restricted, and independent housing eliminated through bureaucratic obstacles. Court officials were implementing economic warfare designed to make resistance financially impossible. His choice was reduced to complete submission or complete destitution. Preserved records document escalating institutional paranoia about Karl Alexander's potential for public resistance. Palace security reports show increased surveillance of his apartments, monitoring of foreign correspondence, and preparation for scandal management if he attempted to expose the pressure campaign publicly. By early 1894, intelligence files reveal the pressure campaign had isolated Karl Alexander from documented romantic relationships, eliminated access to independent financial resources, and destroyed political marriage options. But rather than producing desired compliance, court officials discovered their persecution had created something far more dangerous: a prince with nothing left to lose. The institutional machinery had cornered Karl Alexander, but palace officials were about to discover that cornered royals could be unpredictably destructive. The final phase of Karl Alexander's destruction began with a document that court officials believed would resolve the dynastic crisis permanently. Palace archives contain a formal ultimatum, dated February 1894, presenting Karl Alexander with an explicit choice: immediate marriage to an approved German princess within 6 months, or permanent forfeiture of all succession rights, titles, and financial support. This was not negotiation. This was institutional capitulation designed to eliminate any possibility of continued resistance to dynastic requirements. Court memoranda from the Württemberg State Council reveal the careful selection of Princess Auguste Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein as Karl Alexander's designated bride. Palace officials had calculated that her family's desperate need for political alliance would ensure compliance with the marriage arrangement, regardless of Karl Alexander's documented reluctance. Intelligence files show that court administrators had already negotiated the engagement terms with her family, including financial settlements and political agreements, before informing Karl Alexander of the decision. His consent was considered irrelevant to the arrangement. The preserved correspondence between Duke Wilhelm II and Kaiser Wilhelm II's government documents the broader imperial pressure supporting this marriage ultimatum. Prussian diplomatic archives contain explicit requests for imperial enforcement of the engagement, with court officials arguing that Karl Alexander's continued resistance represented a threat to German military coordination in southern Europe. The marriage was not merely dynastic strategy, it was being framed as a matter of imperial security, requiring state-level intervention. But intelligence files reveal that court officials had severely miscalculated Karl Alexander's response to this ultimatum. Rather than producing the expected submission, palace surveillance reports document his immediate consultation with legal advisors about challenging the marriage requirement through appeals to international royal courts. Karl Alexander was exploring options for legal resistance that court officials had not anticipated, potentially exposing the surveillance and pressure campaigns to international scrutiny. The preserved records document palace panic, following Karl Alexander's consultation with foreign legal experts. Court administrators discovered that their systematic persecution had created comprehensive documentary evidence that could be used against them in international royal courts. The intercepted letters, surveillance reports, and financial manipulation that had been designed to control Karl Alexander could be weaponized as evidence of institutional misconduct if he chose to resist publicly. Administrative files from the Württemberg royal household reveal the escalation of pressure tactics designed to prevent Karl Alexander from pursuing legal resistance. Palace officials began threatening criminal prosecution under expanding sodomy laws, suggesting that his documented relationships could result in imprisonment rather than mere exile. Court memoranda show calculations of potential prison sentences and discussions of arrangements with local law enforcement to ensure Karl Alexander's prosecution if he refused the marriage ultimatum. The most disturbing evidence comes from palace security reports documenting preparations for Karl Alexander's potential physical detention. Court officials were discussing arrangements for confining him within palace grounds to prevent contact with foreign legal advisors or potential allies who might support his resistance. The marriage ultimatum was being supported by preparations for imprisonment. Financial records reveal that court officials had already begun transferring Karl Alexander's personal assets to ensure his economic dependence on palace approval. His choice was being reduced to marriage, imprisonment, or destitution. But palace administrators were about to discover that desperate princes could choose options they had not considered. The institutional machinery had created an ultimatum designed to ensure Karl Alexander's compliance, but they were about to confront the possibility that he might choose complete destruction rather than forced submission. The incident that destroyed Karl Alexander's last hopes of maintaining his position occurred in March 1894. Documented in palace security reports that court officials initially attempted to suppress entirely. Rather than accepting the marriage ultimatum or submitting to institutional pressure, Karl Alexander chose a course of action that palace administrators had never anticipated. He attempted to flee Germany with his documented lover, Heinrich von Castell, using forged travel documents and palace funds that he had secretly accumulated through sympathetic court staff members. Palace intelligence files preserve detailed accounts of the escape attempt that began on the night of March 15, 1894. Court security reports document that Karl Alexander and von Castell had planned their departure for Switzerland, where they intended to seek asylum under international protection laws that might shield them from German prosecution. The preserved correspondence shows that Karl Alexander had contacted Swiss authorities about potential sanctuary, explicitly identifying himself as a political refugee fleeing persecution for his sexual identity. But palace surveillance networks detected the escape attempt within hours of their departure from Stuttgart. Administrative records from the Württemberg royal household reveal that court officials had been monitoring Karl Alexander's financial transactions and had discovered his accumulation of travel funds weeks before the actual escape attempt. Palace security had allowed the plan to develop in order to gather comprehensive evidence of his treasonous intentions for use in legal proceedings. The captured fugitives were returned to Stuttgart under armed guard, but the damage to Karl Alexander's position was catastrophic and irreversible. Court memoranda document that palace officials now possessed documented evidence of attempted flight, use of forged documents, theft of palace funds, and collaboration with foreign governments, charges that could support criminal prosecution rather than mere dynastic exile. Karl Alexander had provided court administrators with legal justification for his complete destruction. Intelligence files reveal that palace officials immediately leveraged this scandal to eliminate any remaining opposition to Karl Alexander's removal from succession. The preserved correspondence between Duke Wilhelm II and Kaiser Wilhelm II shows that the escape attempt was characterized as evidence of Karl Alexander's fundamental unreliability for dynastic responsibility. Palace administrators argued that his willingness to flee Germany demonstrated loyalty to personal relationships over imperial obligations, making him a permanent security threat. The most devastating consequence of the failed escape was the systematic punishment of everyone who had provided assistance to Karl Alexander and von Castell. Palace administrative records document the immediate dismissal, investigation, and prosecution of court staff members who had facilitated the escape attempt. Several servants were imprisoned, others were banned from royal employment throughout Germany, and their families were subjected to ongoing surveillance. The institutional response was designed to ensure that future royal resistance would receive no internal support. Court files reveal that Karl Alexander's capture and return to palace custody triggered the immediate implementation of the most severe exile conditions that German royal law permitted. Palace officials prepared documentation for his permanent banishment from all German territories, forfeiture of titles and succession rights, and reduction of financial support to subsistence levels. But the preserved records also document something else: Karl Alexander's explicit refusal to accept these terms. Administrative correspondence shows that even facing complete destruction, Karl Alexander continued to demand public acknowledgement of his right to live according to personal conscience rather than dynastic calculation. Palace officials realized that traditional exile arrangements might not resolve the threat he represented to institutional control over royal sexual autonomy. The failed escape had transformed Karl Alexander from a controllable problem into an existential challenge to the entire system of royal sexual surveillance and management. The destruction of Karl Alexander's physical freedom was only the beginning of a far more comprehensive campaign designed to eliminate his existence from historical memory entirely. Palace administrative records from 1894-1896, preserved in the Württemberg State Archives, document a systematic erasure operation that removed Karl Alexander's name, image, and documentation from official dynastic records, court genealogies, and historical chronicles. This was not casual neglect. This was deliberate historical revision designed to make him disappear from royal bloodline documentation as if he had never existed. Court memoranda reveal the establishment of a specialized administrative committee tasked specifically with managing Karl Alexander's historical erasure. Palace officials coordinated the removal of his name from succession documents, military commission records, court social registers, and diplomatic correspondence logs. Administrative files show that court historians were instructed to revise official Württemberg genealogies to eliminate any reference to Karl Alexander's position as heir, his relationships, or his documented resistance to dynastic authority. Royal family trees were systematically redrawn to exclude him entirely. The preserved correspondence between Württemberg court officials and other German royal houses documents the coordination of this erasure campaign across multiple dynasties. Palace administrators were ensuring that Karl Alexander's name would not appear in Allied court records, diplomatic histories, or international royal registers that might preserve evidence of his existence or his persecution. Intelligence files reveal that court officials were systematically requesting the removal of Karl Alexander's documentation from Bavarian, Prussian, and Austrian royal archives to ensure comprehensive historical elimination. But the most disturbing evidence comes from palace financial records, documenting payments for the physical destruction of documentary evidence. Administrative accounts from 1895 show expenditures for archival management, document security, and historical revision, bureaucratic language that concealed payments for the systematic burning of letters, photographs, court records, and personal effects that might preserve evidence of Karl Alexander's existence. Palace officials were not merely hiding his story, they were destroying the physical evidence that he had ever lived. The preserved intelligence files reveal that court administrators were monitoring contemporary historians and court chroniclers to ensure their compliance with the erasure campaign. Palace officials were threatening academic institutions, historical societies, and private scholars with loss of royal patronage unless they eliminated Karl Alexander from their records and publications. The erasure was not limited to official court documents. It extended to independent historical scholarship that might preserve his memory. Administrative records document the systematic redistribution of Karl Alexander's former titles, properties, and ceremonial positions to eliminate any institutional memory of his previous status. Court officials were ensuring that no palace tradition, ceremonial protocol, or administrative procedure would preserve evidence of his former position as heir to Württemberg. Every aspect of palace life that had acknowledged his existence was systematically revised to exclude him. Financial documents reveal ongoing expenditures for maintaining the Erasure campaign years after Karl Alexander's exile. Palace officials were paying for continued monitoring of historical publications, systematic revision of newly discovered documents, and coordination with allied courts to ensure that the erasure remained comprehensive and permanent. But court security reports from this period document something that palace administrators had not anticipated: the preservation of unofficial records by sympathetic court staff, foreign diplomatic observers, and independent chroniclers who understood that they were witnessing deliberate historical revision. The institutional machinery had succeeded in erasing Karl Alexander from official history, but scattered evidence was surviving in places that palace officials could not control. The institutional erasure campaign that attempted to eliminate Karl Alexander from historical memory failed to achieve complete success because palace administrators could not control every location where evidence might survive. Scattered fragments of documentation preserved in foreign diplomatic archives, private family collections, and independent institutional records have allowed historians to reconstruct the systematic persecution that Württemberg court officials worked so desperately to conceal. The most significant surviving evidence comes from the Bavarian diplomatic archives, which preserved correspondence between Württemberg and Munich court officials discussing Karl Alexander's case as precedent for managing similar situations within the Wittelsbach dynasty. These letters, discovered in 1982 during routine archival reorganization, contain explicit references to surveillance techniques, pressure tactics, and erasure protocols that palace administrators shared between royal houses. The preserved documents reveal that Karl Alexander's persecution was studied and replicated across German courts. Private family archives belonging to the von Castell family contain the most intimate surviving evidence of Karl Alexander's relationships and resistance. Heinrich von Castell's descendants preserved his personal correspondence, including letters from Karl Alexander that document both their romantic relationship and Karl Alexander's explicit awareness of institutional surveillance. These letters, donated to the German Historical Institute in 1995, provide irreplaceable evidence of Karl Alexander's emotional state and political understanding during the systematic destruction of his autonomy. Intelligence records from the Swiss Federal Archives preserve documentation of Karl Alexander's attempted asylum request, including his formal petition describing persecution for sexual identity and his detailed account of German royal surveillance systems. Swiss diplomatic officials maintained these records despite German pressure for their destruction, recognizing their potential significance for international law regarding political refugees fleeing persecution for sexual orientation. These documents provide Karl Alexander's own testimony about his persecution. But the most unexpected source of surviving evidence comes from the personal diary of Princess Augusta Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein, Karl Alexander's intended bride, preserved in the Danish Royal Archives. Her private writings document court officials' explanations of Karl Alexander's unsuitability for marriage and reveal institutional anxiety about potential public exposure of surveillance campaigns. Princess Augusta Victoria recorded her understanding that Karl Alexander was being punished for loving inappropriately, and that palace officials fear his resistance might encourage similar defiance among other German princes. Contemporary newspaper archives from Swiss and Austrian publications preserve oblique references to Karl Alexander's case that survived German censorship efforts. Foreign journalists documented rumors of dynastic difficulties within Württemberg without explicit details, but their preserved reports establish contemporary awareness that institutional persecution was occurring. These fragmentary references provide evidence that Karl Alexander's case was internationally recognized despite official German silence. Financial records from the Vatican secret archives contain unexpected documentation of Karl Alexander's case. Catholic diplomatic correspondence reveals that German court officials consulted Vatican authorities about potential ecclesiastical support for forced marriage arrangements, suggesting that religious institutions were aware of and potentially complicit in the persecution of royal sexual autonomy. Private collections belonging to former court staff families contain the most human evidence of Karl Alexander's destruction. Preserved letters from dismissed palace servants describe their witness to surveillance operations, document destruction campaigns, and Karl Alexander's emotional deterioration under institutional pressure. These testimonies provide irreplaceable evidence of the human cost of royal sexual persecution. The scattered survival of this evidence reveals that institutional erasure campaigns, however comprehensive, cannot eliminate every trace of systematic persecution when that persecution involves multiple institutions, foreign governments, and human witnesses. The systematic persecution of Prince Karl Alexander was not an isolated Württemberg crisis. It was the refinement and implementation of a coordinated template for managing royal sexual autonomy that German courts had developed through decades of institutional experimentation. Intelligence files from multiple European archives reveal that Karl Alexander's case became a studied precedent for surveillance, pressure, and erasure campaigns that other monarchies adapted and deployed against their own problematic heirs throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Court correspondence between German, Austrian, and Russian royal houses documents the systematic sharing of surveillance techniques, pressure protocols, and erasure strategies that palace administrators had refined during Karl Alexander's persecution. The preserved diplomatic archives show that European monarchies were operating coordinated intelligence networks specifically designed to monitor and control royal sexual conduct across dynastic boundaries. Karl Alexander's surveillance, pressure campaign, and historical erasure became a proven methodology that other courts studied and replicated. Administrative records from the Habsburg archives reveal that Austrian court officials implemented surveillance systems modeled explicitly on the Württemberg protocols used against Karl Alexander when managing similar situations involving archdukes Franz Ferdinand and Otto. Russian imperial archives contain intelligence files documenting consultation with German court experts about managing Grand Duke Sergei Mikhailovich's documented relationships with male court officials. The institutional techniques that destroyed Karl Alexander were being exported and systematically implemented across European royal houses. But the most disturbing evidence comes from French diplomatic archives documenting Third Republic intelligence coordination with monarchist exile communities to monitor potential royal sexual scandals that might be weaponized for political destabilization. Republican governments were studying German royal surveillance techniques not to eliminate them, but to exploit them for anti-monarchist propaganda purposes. The persecution methods that destroyed Karl Alexander were being adapted for broader political warfare against royal institutions themselves. The preserved records reveal that European courts had recognized royal sexual autonomy as an existential threat to dynastic stability, requiring coordinated international response. Palace administrators understood that individual monarchies could not effectively manage royal sexual conduct without systematic cooperation between allied courts. Karl Alexander's case demonstrated both the necessity and the effectiveness of institutionalized persecution protocols that transcended national boundaries. Intelligence files from the British Foreign Office archives contain documentation of consultations with German court officials about potential surveillance applications for managing irregularities within the British royal family. The systematic persecution techniques refined during Karl Alexander's destruction were being evaluated for implementation across European monarchies, regardless of their political relationships or traditional rivalries. The institutional machinery that destroyed Karl Alexander had succeeded in creating a replicable template for eliminating royal sexual autonomy that survived the individual monarchies that created it. European courts had developed systematic methods for surveillance, pressure, and erasure that could be adapted and implemented against any royal whose personal life threatened dynastic requirements. This is not the only royal life that was quietly erased. Please subscribe to the channel to open the next sealed file. The pattern Karl Alexander's persecution established continued to operate long after his individual destruction, claiming other royal lives through the same institutional mechanisms that had eliminated him from history. The template had proven its effectiveness, and European courts continued to implement it against targets whose stories remain hidden in archives that have not yet been unsealed.